Hello. You can leave with this one, Charmaine.
So hi everybody, we're back again, ready to talk about, go into a little bit more detail about trauma and how that can affect us in regards to trauma for baby or trauma in pregnancy. And I really wanted to have a conversation because Rosie's got a real specialism around this area about how things that has happened in our society historically can actually still be happening, impacting us today and potentially impact us in the future. So I'm the pregnancy yoga and baby yoga teacher for Enjoy Yoga, and passing over to Rosie, who's the founder of Enjoy, to talk to us a little bit more.
Oh, bless you. Thanks. So hello, everybody. So yeah, just in case you didn't catch that, Charmaine is our Birthlight pregnancy and baby yoga teacher, and we are Enjoy Yoga now trading as Rosie Glow. So if you look us up, we were originally Croydon based, South Croydon based. So I started Enjoy Yoga in 2004, but since then, since COVID, we've gone global. So wherever you're watching this from, remember that you can join our live classes or catch our replays. And what we want to do is really inspire you to understand that at this time that we're in now, the one that is affecting all of us and has the potential impact to be either the most amazing time or the most terrible time in terms of what gets passed on from one generation to the next. I personally really want to inspire you to look at this in the most empowered way. And my areas of speciality are, first and foremost, I am a senior yoga teacher with 20 years experience. I have a background as a Reiki master as well. My specialism started very early with fertility, pregnancy, birth, postnatal and baby yoga, and I am a tutor for Birthlight, who is the company that we both trained with, and then I became a teacher trainer for. And one of the things that's really important about Birthlight is they would yearly do a conference at Cambridge University. The woman who founded it, Dr. Françoise Friedman, is basically a medical anthropologist, a doctor of medical anthropology at Cambridge. She spent years in the Amazon, and she brought practices from the Amazon that she learned there back to the UK, merged them with her interest in swimming, because she was a swimming instructor, and also yoga, and created what today is what we call Birthlight, which is yoga-based practices that facilitate joyful pregnancy, birth and parenting. And what fascinated me about these conferences was basically learning about research way ahead of it becoming mainstream. And one of the things I remember also in my training was in the back of our books, there was always some handouts from this scientist called Dr. Bruce Lipton. Now, the long and short of it is that I ended up being fascinated by Bruce Lipton's work. He is an epigeneticist, and he was one of the first to basically help people understand that the brain of a cell is not the nucleus. It is actually the membrane. And this is all about perception, how we perceive reality. It's all about the fact that we get our information from the outside that affects our genetic expression, rather than it's something inside that triggers and then affects this genetic expression. And that allows us to understand that genetic determinism, so I don't want to lose you with this, but if you went to school and studied psychology or biology, there was always the nature-nurture debate, right? What is it that's more powerful? And we know that nature will give us some kind of predisposition towards health or ill health, but it's actually the nurture that is going to determine whether that potential, the genetic potential, is expressed either positively or negatively. So I just want to start with that, because since sort of doing all this pregnancy and birth work, I've ended up moving more towards online coaching myself. I work as what I call a multi-dimensional success coach, but essentially what I do is I clear people's cellular memory. I help them to access trauma, not in any painful way, but actually to reprogram traumatic memories and to be able to start to live stripped of the conditioning that has put them either in a state of fight or flight or a state of freeze, both being examples of an overactive sympathetic nervous system. And that is the part of you that has to like get ready to fight or flight, and once you've done as much fighting and flighting as you can, you're so tired you just play dead, or it doesn't seem like fighting or flighting is an option and you play dead. Now, why is this important? Because it all starts in the womb. It all starts from the time that we are actually growing inside the womb. Very early in the pregnancy, the heart, the spinal cord, the heart, the nervous system and the brainstem all start to develop. And, you know, it's a fascinating thing you can look up on YouTube, but essentially it's all happening around the same time. And any kind of trauma a woman experiences when she's pregnant has an impact on the cellular memory of the baby, depending on what stage of pregnancy that trauma occurred, like a shock, you know, whatever that might have been. that will also have a different kind of effect on the baby's development. But the main thing I want to talk about is chronic stress, because chronic stress is when, instead of your sympathetic nervous system being triggered because of a one event that is like, oh, nearly jumped in front of a car, what ends up happening is you're constantly in a state of fear, because you're constantly being bombarded with information, whether it's bombs dropping, whether it's being in an abusive relationship, whether it's having the news on all the time and listening to horror stories of what's going on. These all impact your perception of how safe you are in the world. And as a pregnant woman, you are constantly feeding information to your baby about the world that they're going to be born into. What does this mean? A woman is in a constant state of low stress, medium stress, high stress, but chronic stress. Her baby's brain and nervous system is going to develop differently to a baby that's growing in a womb where a woman feels really safe, well nourished, well supported. And why is that important now? Well, we are apparently, and I say apparently because there are a lot of question marks around this, and it's not a time in pregnancy to try and work it all out. Your energy really needs to go to growing your baby. But when you allow yourself to accept that there's a lot of chaos in the environment and a lot of instability, the people that are currently in power are generally men. And they are the descendants, because most of them, certainly in the Western world, here in the UK and Europe, most of them are white, right? And the US as well, there's a lot of that. And basically, they are the grandsons and the sons, and some may even be great-grandsons, of the men and women that lived through World War I and World War II, or didn't live through World War I or World War II. And I want you just to take a moment to consider the parallels here, because we don't have bombs dropping over our heads, but we have an invisible enemy that we're all fighting, and we are needing to suppress a virus. Like, I'm just using his words, bless our Prime Minister. And I just want to say that what I understand and what I've learned is that trauma passes from one generation to the next until a generation has enough security around them, they feel safe enough to start to work through that trauma and express it. Now, just to give you a couple of terms, the ego is given a bad name, right? But the ego is just your conditioning, it's your programmed self. And a way to understand the ego is it's very linked to the brain, because the brain is a computer that has all this information in it that's based on the past. It doesn't have information for the future. It can only create the future from the past. If you have a history of trauma of any type, and that trauma has not been processed, it passes from one generation to the next. Now, you may have heard the term emotional intelligence. We know about IQ. This is EQ as well. You may also be aware of the capacity that we have as human beings to form functioning, healthy relationships, to bond. Now, how many people have you been out with before you got married, or, before you settled down with someone, where just felt like they just couldn't actually meet you emotionally? They couldn't meet you where you needed to be met. They couldn't meet your needs. Many of us are walking around with unmet needs. And I want you again to consider the impact of chronic stress due to war or famine. Whether it was a civil war or it was a world war. You're looking here at the fact that women would have been pregnant, not knowing where their next meal is coming from, or they're having very low amounts of food, like rations. Perhaps their husband is at war. Perhaps their husband is dead. Perhaps their husband has come back and can't work because they're injured from the whole experience. Perhaps their baby isn't even their husband's, because everybody's living for today, because you just don't know what's going to happen. And perhaps they can't actually look after their children once they're born, because they've actually got to go back to work. They've got to be part of the effort to save the country, to save the planet, right? So all of this has gone on between the First and the Second World War. And just to give you an example, Boris, his great-grandfather and my great-grandfather have something in common. They were both killed by the Turks. Now, I have an ancestry of Greek origin. His is Turkish, but I lived, like my family lived in a Greek colony in the southern part of Turkey. And this was when the big massacre occurred, and the Greeks there, they hadn't fled. They were basically killed pretty graphically by the Turks, right? No offense to Turkish people here. We're not like in any kind of zone, like we're just looking at history. So I know that my great-grandfather was beheaded. And I know that my great-grandmother fled for her life with her son, her 2-year-old son, and she was pregnant with my grandmother at the time. Now, I'm fourth generation from there, right? But if I try and talk to my family members that have basically are closer to that generation, they can't compute. It will be a joke, or it will be ignored, the questions that I ask, because people cannot compute trauma if there's too much and they haven't been given ways to deal with it. Now, if you bring this back to today, the people, as I said, who are making decisions about our future are in generally the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren of those who were in a state of chronic stress. So they themselves are not well regulated. They will see a threat and they will make it a bigger threat, because everything is about surviving rather than thriving. Now, if you look at this purely physiologically and you think what I'm talking about doesn't make sense to you yet, Charmaine has talked before in another video about oxytocin and endorphins and how they help us. They're the rest, repair, feed and breed hormones. They help us get pregnant, stay pregnant, birth easily, bond with our babies, breastfeed, all of the rest of it. The and antithesis to this are the stress hormones. So the catecholamines, the adrenaline, noradrenaline. And when you have more of that cocktail of hormones in your physiology, your baby's brain is going to develop differently. The hind brain is going to develop faster than the forebrain. So they're going to react first, think second. They're also going to perceive the world as more threatening, because this is the information mum said, watch out, there's all sorts of danger about. So they're wired to survive, not to thrive. People that are currently making the decisions are wired to survive, not to thrive. So are the best decisions being made? There's a lot of questions we could ask there, but in terms of us and now, we are being scared into a state where everything seems like a threat. And if we do not have a place to be able to turn that around, to be able to shift our perception, to minimize the threat, maximize our empowerment and our sense of what we can actually do about it, start to look at how we can strengthen ourselves, how we can strengthen our young, how we can prepare for the best and deal with the worst and work through it without it actually compacting us, then what do? We repeat the trauma that has actually gone on in the past. And what this means is, again, sorry, I'm gone a bit of a ramble with this one, but the subconscious will always seek to try and understand the stories of the past, right? So we create dramas in our lives that will trigger the trauma of previous generations so that we can live it out, act it out, and therefore release it from our cellular memory. Now, today, I see what's happening today as a mass fear detox happening in the collective, right? Based on the need to clear all of this. But if we try and suppress it, which is all anyone will recommend you do if they don't know how to deal with traumatic stuff, then it's going to come back later. So as a pregnant woman, I'll be like, well, you must be feeling more anxious, more worried, more fearful than the average pregnant woman who already feels anxious and fearful and worried. So what do you do with that? Well, this is why you really need practices that are going to help you learn to shed fear, stress, worry, anxiety from your body, how to notice it, be mindful of it, turn it around, teach your baby to thrive rather than survive. And this is the invitation for this generation, is we have the opportunity to heal many generations of trauma. Some research says that trauma can be traced back through our genetics to 14 generations. They've done that with certain mice and rat experiments, but we know that the Holocaust leaves an imprint in our genetic profiling. And obviously I'm talking back again to the Second World War regarding that, but we can definitely say 4 to 7 generations for sure. And whenever I was working with really tough fertility clients scenarios, women weren't getting pregnant, there was always some relationship with a trauma that hadn't been processed somewhere in the generations before. And that's what changes things, is knowing this. So this is really, I mean, any questions on that?
I just find it really fascinating, because if you think about things, like you said, who's in, thinking about like people who are in charge now are dealing with traumas from First and Second World War. That's just evident. And then if we think about, as we are a melting pot in London, we are dealing with things that may be civil wars from America. We're dealing with slavery. We're dealing with American, Native American Indians, like globally across the world, the Amazon. Everybody would have had a level of trauma of some kind. And as we've come together and even mixing of cultures, there must be layers of trauma with people from different cultures and backgrounds as well. So really, this is everybody. This is not any one group of people. We're all having to manage this in one way, shape, or form. And this is why it's really important for us to come together to link anymore. So Rosie, do you think that that if women can embrace that that's an issue, that they're able to release through yoga practice. Are they able to do breath through yoga practice? To me, it makes sense that by relaxing more, by linking into those hormones, we want to see more of the laughing and happy and smiling and being in a good space. That is obviously going to support to suppress some of these, not suppress the trauma, but release some of it, because things are coming up now in COVID, in lockdown, that people are having to deal with face to face. There's not much escape for it. But like you said, people are still trying to suppress. So do you feel there are ways that we can actually release this, and what are those ways, I guess?
Well, absolutely. I mean, there are so many. It's a bit of a longer one than we expected, but this,
Yeah.
you know, anyone who's like, what's the deal with the vaccine argument? You know, what's the deal with, like you said, slavery? What's the deal with the world economic system? What is the deal with this big reset? You know, I could go on many different tangents with this, but what I would say is, if an emotion is triggered, that is the opportunity to heal and release it. So let's just take the example, for example, of a fever, right? When you're a parent and your child has a fever, certainly 20 years ago, you were told, give your child Calpol. Now, I tested this out the other day. I actually asked one of the parents I know whose kids are between 5 and 11, you know, what do you do if your kid's got a fever? Oh, Calpol. Or do you know that the guidelines have changed? They're now telling you not to suppress a fever. Listen to my words, not to suppress a fever, because it's the management of a fever that will help a child to develop a natural immunity to something, and therefore they don't need to suppress their immune system, which is what we do with vaccines. And we don't need to suppress a fever, because actually that's dangerous. So we're learning about the fact that suppressing things generally, whether it's personally or collectively, is not a good idea. When you're pregnant, you are like an emotional melting pot, right? We feel everything, oh, so big. So if you feel fear, you feel lots of fear. If you feel anger, you feel lots of anger. Now, many pregnant women will be really scared about the impact of their emotions on their baby. They usually come to pregnancy yoga, very often if they're new to yoga, not for themselves, but for their baby, because they've read it's good for them, right? So, you know, what we'll do for our children is absolutely phenomenal. But essentially what this comes down to is the fact that you learn to move things through your body, to allow things to pass through your body rather than to suppress them and block them. Because cellular memory, trauma in our cellular memory, is simply some emotion, physical event, psychological impact that hasn't been processed yet. Now, when we talk, we have to be careful, because you know, when you're pregnant and a woman will come up to you and go, oh, I had the most terrible birth, it was awful. And they'll tell you all their crap, right? That's a woman who has not processed her birth trauma. So you trigger her because you are pregnant. And what happens is she comes up to you, and because she hasn't processed it, she's got to project it, right? And this is what's happening in the world at large. Like, I'm sure those of you who are new to these concepts, you can feel this idea of microcosm, macrocosm, that what's going on within is going on outside. So we have this opportunity now to heal through breath, through movement, through sound practices, through being able to turn a negative to a positive, not to keep gassing on about how terrible everything is. Yoga teaches you the discipline of shifting your perspective. Positive affirmations, intentions, Sankalpa, whatever you want to call it, is training the conscious mind in the direction we want. But you don't really want to be thinking your way through life, because all you're doing is you're using the past to predict the future, which is great if you had a fabulous past. But if you didn't, you really want to look at that. The moment of now is the heart-centered moment, where whatever happened in the past is in the past. And there's a wonderful saying, it's not the way it should have been, it's not the way it could have been, it is the way it is. And when you come to that place of accepting it and saying, the world is also in a state where we have to accept it is the way it is, but what do we want to do next? Do we want a healthcare system that's really about thriving rather than surviving? Do we want an education system where we actually bring up free thinkers that are developers, innovators, that put the environment first, put humanity first, put sustainability first? You know, any of you who are pregnant, I hope you're thinking about these things. And if you are worried about what's going on in the world, you are the voices that will fight for your children, that will say, we're not doing this anymore. And this is the beauty, is you can find your power in this pregnancy. It doesn't matter how much trauma is in the past. It doesn't matter how much anxiety, fear, stress you have. What matters is what you do with it. So the impact of unprocessed emotions on your baby is damaging. The impact of unprocessed stressful emotions will include your baby finding it difficult to sleep, to settle, to soothe themselves. It will also likely lead to them having digestive issues, whether that's reflux or chronic pain or constipation. It also depends on their capacity to be able to bond with you and actually establish breastfeeding, and also the connection that allows them to feel safe in the world, right? So there's so much that can happen. Did I answer your question?
Yes, you did. Brilliant. Thank you so much. It's perfect. Yeah.
But this kind of thing, if you like the tone of this and you'd like to know more about any of the things that we've talked about here, please let us know. Like, just respond in the video and we will make more videos about this, because 20 years have gone by of me studying this stuff, observing it, seeing the contradictions in our environment and really asking the question, what world do we want to create? And that's why I've moved to where I am in my work, is I work with people to teach them how to use their power wisely and to undo the self-sabotage that keeps them creating the past. So this is the joy for me, is to start to work with people that are really going to see the benefit of shifting our perspective of what's going on in the world and be solution orientated rather than problem focused. That's what pregnancy yoga teaches you to do. And it's also what baby yoga develops, because watch the other video on baby yoga that we're going to be making shortly, but the continuity of pregnancy, time giving birth, and then immediately coming back to baby yoga, like literally you could have just given birth and be in your baby yoga class if it's a virtual class, right? Learning from very early on to establish what their cues mean, to establish their different cries, to know how to soothe them, to know how to work with any issues that come up early so that they don't become bigger problems. Like, you want to do that in the first few days, not in the first few weeks. You want to do it as quickly as possible. It's never too late, but the sooner you intervene positively, the better the outcomes, right? The less work you have to put into it. So I want to inspire a whole generation of mums just to channel whatever anger, stress, anxiety you have into passion for change, and to realize that in these classes, you've also got this opportunity to learn to look after yourself and your children holistically, to find out about all the alternatives that are not promoted by our public health system, to know that, yes, you can take your health into your own hands, work with the services that are there by all means, but like, learn to trust your instincts, because it's maternal instinct. And I'll tell you, it's brilliant. This Christiane Northrup talks about this a lot. Phenomenal obstetrician who's campaigned for women's rights during labour. The potential that we actually have here is just amazing in terms of what we can actually do. What was I saying about her? I completely forgot.
She's campaigning for women's rights.
Yeah, Christiane Northrup. What did she say? She was talking about. Totally left my brain now. I was saying she's a big campaigner of it, and ultimately, oh, that was it. Mother's instinct. You know, how long have human beings existed? How long have we had our current medical system? Just
difference. Yeah.
Okay, we have phenomenal power, and if we really stop suppressing that power and stop allowing the gaslighting that is going on all around us, you know, like to rob us of our trust in ourselves and to feel like we have to keep giving our power away. Learn to critically examine data. We want to know that we can trust our gut, our hearts, our instincts. Like, this is what allows us to thrive, and this is the invitation. So I hope you enjoyed that.
Thank you. Take care.
Cheers.